Om Jnana Timirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshuranmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Just a few days ago, departed from this world. Now you may wonder why I'm speaking to you about this, as you're living here in Dubai, and you may think, well, we didn't have much contact with Tamal Krsna Maharaj, so why should I speak so much? But actually, for all those who are connected with Prabhupada's ISKCON, whether you know it or not, you're a little cut off from the mainstream of ISKCON life, which has its advantages and disadvantages. Because some advantages in the sense that our movement is a big and often turbulent movement. There are many whirlpools, many things going on, so in some ways it's peaceful to be away from the great fight against Maya, in which fight is a fight. It's not always pleasant. So you may not know so much about him, but actually among Prabhupada's disciples, and everyone knows that Tamal Krsna Maharaj is prominent in our movement in a way which there's no one else prominent in that way. Maybe among all the devotees in our movement, who are very prominent, I think Jayapataka Maharaj also very prominent, but in a very different way, in very different personalities. So you may not know how much you're influenced by him, because he's a very influential person in our movement. I'm still speaking in the present tense. It's very difficult to get used to speaking of him in the past tense. So I'll speak what I can remember, whatever Krishna allows me to remember at this time. Krishna says, Mata smriti jnanam apohanam cha. From me comes remembrance, knowledge and forgetfulness. So I haven't prepared this systematically, but I'll speak what I can remember in glorification of this great personality, great devotee, who was with us until very recently, and is still with us, but not in the same way. Maybe you've seen the photo. Are we showing this now? Yeah. This line where? Oh, it's just on the computer screen. So most of you can't see it, but you'll see there's a very prominent mark here. So I heard that said that those who know the science of physiognomy say that that's the sign of a great personality. This Gorbachev still has. He's a great personality in a different way, materially. So actually Brahmananda Prabhu, who's, if you know at all the history of ISKCON, you must know his name also. These are all big names from the beginning days of ISKCON. He was also there in Mayapur, and the day afterward, in Mayapur, when this event happened. So he was also there, and he revealed something that Tamal Krsna Maharaj had told him, which he said that no one had known this before, because only Tamal Krsna Maharaj had known him. How Tamal Krsna Maharaj first came in contact with Prabhupada. Well, he told that he used to see him because actually Tamal Krsna Maharaj is from New York, and If you know about his personality, then you would understand he's a New Yorker. He's not a Californian. But he joined the movement in California. So he was a musician. He used to play a flute, Ramananda was saying. And he used to go to Tompkins Square Park, where Prabhupada, at the weekend, he would sit on the grass. Prabhupada would sit and he'd chant Hare Krishna. And so many people would come. So the to-be Tamal Krishna Das also used to go there and play his flute. And people used to give some money. But all the people were going to the other side. He wasn't very happy with that. He was thinking, who is this person who's spoiling my business? Later on he came to realize that this was the person who was going to spoil his whole material life. Not very long afterwards. So anyway, he moved out to the west coast. You can find all these things in that book of his. Have you seen that, Servant of the Servant? Who read that book? Okay, it's a very, very inspiring book. So he was part of the west coast hippie scene. And anyway, he joined Prabhupada's movement, and within a short time he became a leader, because it was very much his nature. Just like Prabhupada, he told that when he was born, an astrologer made his chart, and he calculated and he said one thing, Hukam chalega. What he says, people must follow. So Prabhupada is very much like that. He was a person who would, Prabhupada described that even among my friends at school, all throughout his life, whoever he moved among, he was always the leader. So Tamal Krishnaraj was very much like that also. In fact, there was one very astonishing thing about Prabhupada, is that Prabhupada gathered around him many, many people, and many, many very strong personalities. I mean, if you see Tamal Krishnaraj, Brahmananda, Harikesh, Gargamuni, Guru Kripa, there's one volume of it, before the Prabhupada Lamrita was published in 6 volumes, so one of the volumes was titled, Only He Could Lead Them. So that referred to the hippies in the west coast of America, that only he could lead them. Only Prabhupada could lead them, because Prabhupada was such a strong leader. Of course, it may sound like we're talking about some kind of mundane psychology now, but we're not. We're talking about devotees. So apart from Prabhupada being the only person who could lead the west coast hippies, because they wouldn't accept any authority, so Prabhupada was the only person who could lead those persons who became his disciples and who were later known as Tamal Krishna, Brahmananda, Harikesh, Gargamuni, Guru Kripa, Bhavananda, all these very, very powerful personalities. Very, very strong-minded individuals. You know, in America, that's ambitious spirit is there, or that spirit to get ahead and lead others. So again, we're talking about devotees, but devotees, they're not exactly influenced by the culture they're brought up in, but it may superficially appear to be so like that. So Prabhupada, he went to America, because America is leading the world, not Britain. So he went to America, because he thought, if the Americans follow, then everyone will follow. But who will the Americans follow? They're the leaders of the world. How are they going to follow a poor Indian? As Prabhupada described himself. So Prabhupada had that spiritual potency. And he picked up so many, mostly hippies. Prabhupada saw the value. Prabhupada was like an expert gemologist. That some people And most people, they just, if you see some uncut gems, you'll just see some dirty stones. But an expert gemologist, he can see that if you just cut this, you'll have a very valuable diamond or whatever. So Prabhupada saw that these persons, they can do a lot for Krishna. And within a short time, Tamal Krishnaraj was leading the Sankirtan party. Now, we could say that Tamal Krishnaraj was a very competitive and ambitious person. He was very competitive with his godbrothers. They had this competitive American spirit to show who's the best. But Prabhupada was expert in fully dovetailing that in to see who could win the competition to please Prabhupada the best. So at that time they were going out, it was very early days of the movement, we're talking about 67, 68, so the devotees, they would all go out daily for Harinam Sankirtan. And Prabhupada had started this, it was already started in 1944, but he revived his Back to Godhead magazine in America, and he gave it to his disciples. But now this is my contribution to my spiritual master. Now you make this your contribution to your spiritual master. I've taught you about Krishna Bhakti. You write about it, you publish, you distribute. So they were going out on Harinam Sankirtan, but they were hippies who had become devotees. And hippies, their whole thing is to be very individualistic and different. Tamal Krishna, at that time, of course he wasn't sannyasi at that time, he got the idea to organize it better. That management was going on, but it was the hippie era, and it was everything kind of spontaneous. But Tamal Krishna saw that if it's organized properly, we can be so much more effective. I mean, that's just a basic principle of human management. That if things are organized with some planning and some intelligence, then it'll be much more effective. So for the first time, he organized the Sankirtan party. With what's going on here, he analyzed what's going on here. All right, devotees are going out. It's making an impression on the public. We want the public to be exposed to the holy names. We want them to appreciate that, and we want them to take the Back to Godhead magazines. At that time, they were going out with the Back to Godhead magazines, and they'd chant, and a devotee would stand there, and if anyone wanted, then they could come up and give some donation, and they'd give them a magazine. But Tamal Krishna Prabhu at that time, he got all the devotees, the men and the women, to dress in a uniform manner and to go out in lines instead of just straggled all over the place. And he'd have them have a dance pattern, simple. Prabhupada showed the Swami stuff. So they all looked very organized, and it was very attractive. And then he organized that they approach people and get donations for the Back to Godhead magazines. So they started distributing many, many more magazines, and that set the standard for the whole of the rest of ISKCON, which at that point in time was a few centers in America and one in Canada, but it was spreading rapidly. So Prabhupada immediately saw that, well, here's a person who can get things done. So from the very beginning, he was one of the top leaders of the movement in America. The first was Ramananda in New York. He joined in New York. And then in the early days there were three big leaders in the movement. Ramananda, his brother Gargamuni, and Tamal, as they called it. Later on he came to be known among his godbrothers as they'd call him, they or we would call him Tamal, or simply TKG. Even he entitled that book TKG's Diary. So they asked, well, why don't you call it Tamal Krishna Goswami's Daya? He said, well, anyway, they'll call it TKG's Daya. So he gave the name of the book like that. That came much later. So anyway, Prabhupada saw here's a man who can get things done. Prabhupada appreciated that. Prabhupada also knew, Prabhupada was a very practical person. Prabhupada wasn't a sadhu with his head in the clouds. Sadhus are nice people. We like gentle sadhus and people who are calm and peaceful. But actually, if we want to get anything done in this world, then simply to hold a flower and smile isn't going to work. All of you who are posted here in Dubai, most of you have some kind of executive job or something like that. So, you know that in the corporate world, to be nice is not enough. If you're nice, you can be a nice floor sweeper. That's about all. But if you're in management, then you have to be effective. And effective means that superficially you may not appear to be very nice. And often the people who appear to be less nice, they're more effective. I just heard something this morning from Sridhar Maharaj, who you also don't know. You should also call him here. Another very senior Prabhupada sannyasi. He said it's a basic management principle, which I just learned after 45 years, that for a leader to be respected is more important than being loved. So Prabhupada loved all his devotees, but he was especially looking for men who could get things done. And men who can get things done, who have the drive that I really want to do something for Prabhupada. So if you want to organize things and get things done, then often superficially you may not appear to be very nice. You may be a very heavy or strong-minded person. So Prabhupada had he recognized such people, and he didn't say, oh, these are not sadhus, or rather he brought them close to him, because he knew that strong-minded people with a drive to get things done, they can be very helpful in pushing forward this movement. Prabhupada was very ambitious, not in a material sense, but he wanted to please his spiritual master. He wanted to spread Krishna consciousness very quickly, and he did it very quickly with the help of his disciples who he inspired. Of course, you say with the help, but he was fully helping them. So Tamal Krishna Maharaj was one of the persons who Prabhupada picked up in the sense that he gave him so much responsibility. He practically cleaned out the San Francisco center of all its leaders except Jayananda and sent all of them to London. And Tamal Krishna Maharaj, he was, there are many difficulties there in London also. I mean, there are all the time difficulties. In the early days of the movement, it was all the time so many difficulties to get this movement started. But that spirit was there that we have to sacrifice for Prabhupada and Krishna. So Tamal Krishna Maharaj, he was heading up the European mission in England, Germany, France, and then, of course, I'm jumping over a lot of history now. I'm just giving a general overview. So then Prabhupada got into India. Which was the most difficult field for Prabhupada's Western disciples. At that time, there were very few Indian devotees joining our movement, and and very few capable Indian, educated, hardly anyone. So Prabhupada, he had a very strong desire to spread Krishna consciousness in India, which you may think, well, that's strange because Krishna consciousness is already there. But traditional Hinduism was there, and there were so many devotees, but Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's movement was not well known or widely spread. And at that time, to a large extent, Hindus, they were rejecting their own, and even more so now, rejecting their culture. And becoming completely westernized, or doing their best to do so. Now, after many years of practice, the Indians have become more expert at becoming westernized. So, Tamal Krishna Maharaj was one of the first devotees who Prabhupada brought to India, and naturally he engaged him in various management duties. And there are many, many difficulties. The movement, there are many people who are very suspicious of our devotees. Our devotees who are coming from the West, they didn't know many things like the culture and how to behave and how they're expected to behave as sadhus. So many things. So it's often difficult for them to fit in India. Prabhupada was personally, in the West, Prabhupada, he started the movement, and then almost practically from the beginning he gave the management of it over to his disciples in the West. He gave the ideas, now you do it. And they did, with Prabhupada's guidance, because they knew how to move in their own culture. But coming to India was completely different. The language, the heat, the health problems. There was no bottled water in those days, and in many places there wasn't water of any kind at any time. And in many places in the hot season, water, even now you'll find in Gujarat, Rajasthan, water may come for 1 hour every 3 days if you're lucky. Like that. So the devotees had so many health problems and so many different things. Prabhupada was pushing many ambitious projects. At this time Prabhupada started to give sannyas to a few different devotees. And Tamal Krishna, he also got married. He was married. So he also started thinking of taking sannyas. And Prabhupada gave him sannyas. His wife wasn't very happy. She was young. He was young. But Prabhupada gave it anyway. Because Prabhupada saw that we need some sannyasis to push forward this movement. So his wife accepted that, and she's lived all these years as a devotee. So Tamal Krishna Maharaj was given sannyas, and then Prabhupada, he sent him out to preach, because Prabhupada's idea at that time was that sannyasis shouldn't be involved in the management of ISKCON, let them just travel and preach. But then after some time Prabhupada saw that actually we need sannyasis in the management also, because householders, many of them were very competent, but then also they have their family involvement, and they have to think how to get money and so many things. So the management of such a big spiritual organization, it also requires people who have the time and the energy and the dedication and all these things. So then Prabhupada, he was pushing forward this mission in India, and even though he brought many devotees from the West, most of them didn't stay, they went back. And very few of them had the vision that Prabhupada had. Nowadays we see so many of you nice devotees from India. But in those days, hardly anyone was coming forward to join, and the Western devotees couldn't understand. Why is Prabhupada putting so much energy? He was spending most of his time in India, when the Indian people themselves, although they welcomed Prabhupada, we didn't see no one was taking it seriously. They praised Prabhupada, but then there's so many hodgepodge ideas they had. The people were not coming forward. So it was very difficult for the Western devotees to understand why Prabhupada was putting so much energy into this and pushing in this, when no one seemed to be really that much interested. And many devotees, they didn't stay, but some devotees stayed on in India because they, largely because Prabhupada either pushed them, or push them means, he pushed them. He put pressure on them. You should stay. I'm telling you to stay. You should do what I say. I'm your guru. Or because they felt that yes, we have to please Prabhupada. So Prabhupada, he was practically acting as the GBC, and he was overseeing the whole development of ISKCON in India by himself. He had ambitious projects in Mayapur, in Bombay, in Vrindavan, and preaching in various places, getting books imported in those days, and running books translated, and so many things. Prabhupada had so many big plans, and they weren't just ideas. He wanted to put them into action right away. So Tamal Krsna was one of those devotees who was, he was managing with Prabhupada, and Prabhupada was managing, and Prabhupada gave Tamal Krsna so many responsibilities, and then he took sannyas, and then all the responsibilities came back on Prabhupada. So then again, Prabhupada, he wanted in the beginning that his sannyasis would be completely free from management, but then again he gave to Tamal Krsna, you took sannyas, but anyway I'm giving you management responsibilities. Because it's necessary. You can't preach properly unless things are well organized. There has to be some efficiency, discipline, organization. So then Prabhupada gave him these management duties, but there are many austerities that he had to undergo. I mean, it's difficult to understand how difficult it was. I had some idea of that from preaching in Bangladesh, but there were so many physical difficulties, mental difficulties, and on top of all that, there was the difficulty of not having the spiritual bliss of preaching as it was in the West, because in the West, devotees were going out and they were openly preaching, and people were taking it up and becoming convinced. But in India at that time, like I was saying, there are very few people. It's a different atmosphere now. In those days, I first came to India in 76, and I came for staying and preaching in 77. So that was a little later than the time I'm talking about now. But in those days still, mostly everyone we spoke to said, you don't have to tell me, I'm a Hindu, I know everything about Krishna. So it's very difficult to preach to people who think they already know everything. Well, they didn't know. The problem was that they thought they knew, but they didn't. They had so many hodgepodge mixed up ideas. And they thought, why should I listen to a Westerner? Tell me, I'm a Hindu. I know about Krishna. So the lack of that genuine interest to hear about Krishna and to communicate Krishna consciousness, that was also very difficult for devotees to undergo day after day and week after week. So Tamal Krsna Maharaj, he was hearing about the devotees in the West and how they were distributing books and how the Prabhupada was pleased with that. And of course he had so much personal association with Prabhupada, because Prabhupada would intimately discuss with him about all the different matters. But there was a lot of discussion about accounts and with Prabhupada, and legal matters and technical details of construction, how to get permission to release cement, because it was all under government quota and there was only limited quantities, and how you want to build a building, you have to have cement. One time Prabhupada arrived in Palam, at that time it was called Palam Airport. They were driving out to Vrindavan. Devotees were waiting for Prabhupada to say something about Krishna. After some time Prabhupada said something, cement. Prabhupada was thinking of cement. Are we getting enough cement to build our temple? Prabhupada was very practical. So there was all the time, managing in India in those days meant talking about cement and quotas and legal matters, and then the devotees themselves just managing all the different difficulties that all they were having among themselves. And so after some time, Tamal Krsna Maharaj was thinking that, I really need to go to the West and get fully into the fire of dynamic preaching. And actually at this time, so we've heard, he had a very strong exchange with Prabhupada. Tamal Krsna was one of maybe two people, and maybe more than the other one, who was Harikesh, who actually he'd argue with Prabhupada, and very strongly actually. And other devotees, they couldn't relate to it at all. Prabhupada would take his advice because he considered him a very competent manager. And he would argue with Tamal. Prabhupada would say things and Tamal Krsna would disagree, and Prabhupada would say, no, it's like this. He'd disagree, and sometimes, so I'm told, I was never witness to it, it would be very strong exchange. But that we also have to understand that Prabhupada gave him, Prabhupada didn't reject him for that. Prabhupada allowed him to do that. In one sense you could say he shouldn't do that, but on the other hand, Prabhupada accepted him as an intimate advisor. That's why I'm saying he's a unique person in our movement. There's some reason for that. So that's a very unique, that's a very intimate exchange. If you can argue with your spiritual master, it's not recommended. Don't do it. Of course, Prabhupada was always the guru. So then the point was that Tamal Krsna Maharaj, I have to leave India now. And finally Prabhupada, he had to accept. And Prabhupada said that, well, you can give up this management, but I can't. I have to go on with it. So then Tamal Krsna Maharaj went back to America, and he teamed up with his old friend Vishnu Jan, who had been his friend in hippie days, and they joined practically together. And then Vishnu Jan Swami was traveling in America with an old bus which he'd made into a temple, and he was traveling around and doing festival programs. They'd go to college campuses, they'd chant and they'd distribute prasadam. Tamal Krsna Maharaj came along, and he was a very organized person, extremely intelligent person. So he saw that this is very nice preaching, but actually there could be so much more done from it. People are attracted, they like it, but then the bus goes away. So Tamal Krsna Maharaj saw that when the bus goes away to another place, it should go away with more men in it than when it came. Because people are being attracted to this kirtan, they like it, so why don't we take people with us? So he took up the service of, when they were doing the kirtan, Vishnu Jan would do the kirtan, Tamal Krsna Maharaj would look and see who's listening very nicely, who's very interested, and afterwards he'd go up and speak to them and preach to them. He was a very expert and empowered preacher, that he could make people he'd speak to them for maybe half an hour, 1 hour, 2 hours, and then he'd have people ready to drop whatever they were doing and come on the bus. And in this way he made maybe hundreds of devotees. He was such a powerful preacher. And not only did he stick them on the bus, but he trained them. Prabhupada trained him very closely. Prabhupada was although I'm saying Tamal Krsna would sometimes argue with him, but Prabhupada dealt with different people in different ways, according to their nature and according to the ability of what they could take also. Recently one of my godbrothers, who had a lot of association with Prabhupada, said that Prabhupada was very, very kind to women and children. He was generally very, very soft and loving and gentle with them. And he was always encouraging them. But Prabhupada was, on the whole, I wouldn't say he was very soft and gentle with Tamal Krsna Maharaj. He was very heavy with him, because he knew that that's what he needed and that's what he could take. Not everyone can take it. And he trained him he trained him in all aspects of Krishna conscious philosophy, culture, all that time he spent in India, and then in management matters and what it means to be a disciple. He trained him very, very thoroughly. And then Tamal Krsna Maharaj went to America. He made devotees, and he trained them. And he knew that Prabhupada, he was very much wanted this book distribution. So from that original traveling program, doing colleges with one bus, eventually Tamal Krsna Maharaj made several buses, and they were filled up with men fully enthusiastic to distribute Prabhupada's books. And he created still today, those among Prabhupada's disciples, the legendary Radha Damodar traveling Sankirtan party, which had buses. It was crisscrossing America and distributing. In those days, actually, they were distributing literally hundreds of thousands of magazines and books. Literally. Back to Godhead magazine, some months they printed 1 million copies every month. Not all distributed by Radha Damodar, but they would take more than half, and the rest of the world the rest. You can imagine, very, 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 very powerful book distribution. And there's a lot of competition. Prabhupada, this competitive spirit that the Americans have, he made the devotees play off against one another. So there's great competition, that the Radha Damodar party, and then there's the Los Angeles temple and other temples. There's one morning walk in America, in which the devotees said that Jayatirtha, he was the GBC in Los Angeles. In Los Angeles, this month they out-distributed the Radha Damodar Sankirtan party. That was unusual. So Prabhupada said, don't say that too loud. Tamal Krsna will have a heart attack. In this way he was pushing them. That who can, because actually Prabhupada, he very strongly pushed this point that he wasn't shy about it. He pushed this point that advancement in Krishna consciousness depends on pleasing your spiritual master. And Prabhupada made it very clear that he wanted his books distributed, and he went to so much effort to make these books. And Prabhupada said that by these books the world will change. You have to distribute these books. This is my service to my spiritual master. And he said that although all services are important, in one sense book distribution is more important. And Prabhupada, that was his he said, this gives me life. I'm an old man. Prabhupada used to say, where am I getting life from? When I hear the Sankirtan book distribution, call that Sankirtan. Sankirtan means chanting. But Prabhupada would say this is the Brihat Mridanga. My Guru Maharaj called this the Brihat Mridanga. Bigger Mridanga. That this can be, the sound of the Mridanga, that can be heard. But this Brihat Mridanga, that will be heard, that will go more widely and more deeply. So we have to print these books and distribute these books. So Tamal Krishna Maharaj took up this. Alright, Prabhupada wants books distributed. Let's see what we can do. Others are distributing books. Let me see what I can do to please Prabhupada. And his idea was that I don't want to be number two. That was always his idea. I don't want to be two. I should be number one. I started this whole book distribution thing. Of course, Prabhupada, but he did. So he very much wanted to be number one, for Prabhupada's pleasure, to see that how I'm pleasing, and by that, then others they also had to come up. So apart from the party that he organized, he also inspired others to distribute so many books. Of course, sometimes the competition got a little rough also, and there were matters of stealing men from temples, and they'd go through one area and they'd see some good brahmachari book distributed in the temple, and they'd say, "Hey, why are you staying in the temple with all these grihastas? You should join the Sankirtan brahmacharis and sannyasis. Then you'll be, all these grihastas, they're all in Maya. You should come out. Just live with Sankirtan brahmacharis." So it got a little intense, to say the least, and the complaints. Now, actually, before this, what happened then? Prabhupada, when he came to America, and he still wanted Tamal Krishna Maharaj to come back to India. So he came and said that now, you see, now I came to America, but immediately when he saw Tamal Krishna Maharaj, he started talking about India. You see, in Bombay, this is the condition. The municipality is still not giving us permission. And in other words, he started to speak like all the things about India, which Tamal Krishna Maharaj had left. So, in other words, he was saying that, okay, you came to America, now I came here, I'm going back, you can come back with me also. Tamal Krishna Maharaj said, well, actually, Prabhupada, I'm preaching here. Prabhupada said, what preaching? What are the results? Show me the results. So he had it all ready. He knew Prabhupada very well. So he had it all ready. So Prabhupada was sitting in his room, and Prabhupada brought one after another. He said, this is Bhakti. He would call one devotee, all new devotees that he'd made. He'd call them, they'd come in, bow down, offer obeisances to Prabhupada. He said, this is Bhakti so-and-so. He's your disciple. He joined on our bus party. He's distributing so many books every day. And this went on. He brought 1, 2, 3, 4, about 20 new devotees. Prabhupada, in the beginning, Prabhupada was very angry. You see, you don't want to follow what I'm saying. You're just doing your own program. What is your preaching? What is your results? So I said, Prabhupada, here are the results. And Prabhupada said, one came. Prabhupada said, oh. Another one. Oh, another one. And by the time Prabhupada had brought in about 18 or 20, Prabhupada said, all right, you can stay. Like this. He was pleased that you're doing something very substantial. Making devotees and having them out. Distributing the books. So Prabhupada agreed. All right, this is the proper preaching field for you. So there was, it came up in 1976 that the Radha Damodar party, the transcendental competition had got to an extremely intense point where the temple presidents, they were mostly grihastas, and they were disturbed by Tamal Krishna Maharaj's, not only by the fact that he was distributing more books than them, but by the fact that they would take away their men, and they were saying all the grihastas are in Maya, and it was like enthusiastic preaching that renunciates can appreciate, but grihastas, they can never appreciate these things, even though it may be true. Don't mind me saying. I'm also like that. So then it came up to the GBC, and they passed. There was a big controversy actually in the GBC meetings. and then under Tamal Krishna Maharaj's influence, we have to understand he's a very, very powerful personality. So they made different resolutions that were actually very restrictive of the Grihastas in ISKCON. And so the GBC resolutions, they had to come to Prabhupada for final approval. And Prabhupada would usually accept what the GBC would say and modify it, but this time actually he rejected, he vetoed several of the resolutions. In other words, it would appear that he sided with the Grihastas, but Prabhupada's point was that we can't reject anyone or say that anyone's better because of their ashram. Everyone is serving Krishna in different conditions. So at that point there was another heavy exchange between Prabhupada and Tamal Krishna Maharaj, in which Prabhupada was saying, you can't do this, you can't preach like this to the Grihastas, you can't steal, they're making devotees, you can't steal them away. Now of course you have to understand these, please don't misunderstand, these are all the dealings. Again, as I was saying, that when a disciple is very intimate with his spiritual master, then there's certain dealings may take place which wouldn't take place between the spiritual master and others who are not so intimate. So anyway, Prabhupada was saying that you can't do this, you can't do that, and Tamal Krishna Maharaj is, Prabhupada, I might as well just go to China. In those days, China was the number one enemy of America. It was a heavy communist country. Might as well go to China. And Prabhupada said, yes. You should go to China. And Prabhupada is completely serious about it. He said, Krishna has inspired you to say this. He was saying it sarcastically. But he said, yes, you should go to China. And Prabhupada is very serious about it. You should go. He said, Tamal Krishna Maharaj said, well, what about all my buses? And what about all my men? The whole Radha Damodar party had built up. I think at that time they had 14 buses and hundreds of men. Tamal Krishna Maharaj had attracted many of the top leading devotees in ISKCON to come and join him and work with him. Prabhupada said, you don't have any buses, you don't have any men. They're all my buses and my men. So then he sent him to China. And then Tamal Krishna Maharaj came back and said, well, look, you sent me to China, but I can't go to China. No one can go to China. No Americans can go to China. No one goes to China. It's closed up completely. Prabhupada said, somehow or other you arrange for my books to go there. And even if you can't go, the books, they will do the job. So that was his mission. That was the order from the spiritual master. He had to take it. And it seemed like Prabhupada was exiling him. But actually he was giving him the service to preach to the largest population on earth, and a very difficult job also, because preaching in such a communist country and people with absolutely trained in atheism and far away from Vedic culture. Of course, many things in Chinese culture, it's related to Indian culture, but really just like one time in America in the early days when someone asked Prabhupada, what do you think of Chinese culture? And Prabhupada simply replied by making some grimace, that's all. He nothing to say. I mean, what is the culture where people eat cockroaches and monkeys' brains, and that's their pride? Dogs and so many things. So, eventually, by the grace of Krishna, China did open up, and there was Hong Kong, and even devotees had been preaching in Hong Kong previous to that, but it's very, very tough. I mean, the Chinese never showed any interest. Gradually they did. He took up the order, and gradually they found the way to make devotees in Hong Kong, which was by doing yoga for health, because they're completely materialistic people. So something for the body. So eventually they brought them in, and then they gave them Chinese-style vegetarian food as prasadam because they don't like Indian-style food. So eventually they found the ways and means to preach. It was very difficult and slow. And then eventually China opened up slightly, and they were able to go in underground and do some preaching, and they made some devotees. And then, because China is a very authoritarian government, so Tamal Krsna Maharaj, and he said, after some time he explained that, yes, now I know why Prabhupada sent me to China, because these people, they know the meaning of discipline. Because he himself was a very strong disciplinarian. So they know the meaning of discipline. So he took up that mission of preaching in China. Slow, difficult work. But towards the end of Prabhupada's time on this planet, Tamal Krsna Maharaj had a very strong conviction that when Prabhupada was actually starting from the Mayapur festival in 1977, Prabhupada became very sick. And Tamal Krsna Maharaj thought that I have no more important duty at this time than to simply be with Prabhupada. So Tamal Krsna Maharaj was with Prabhupada, serving him in the last months. He was with Prabhupada practically day and night, and administering to his every need. Tamal Krsna Maharaj brought him to England when Prabhupada couldn't stand up, couldn't walk. Prabhupada said, I want to go to the West. I want to make one more visit to the West. So they put him they laid him in the back of an ambassador car, drove him to the airport, and then they had 3 seats for him in the plane. So he lay down, and Prabhupada was, no one travels in that condition. But Tamal Krsna Maharaj took him to England. At that time there was talk of him Prabhupada going on to America, but he didn't, he came back. And I just come the other way actually, I just come from England to India. So, and then shortly after that Prabhupada went from India to England. So that was a very, very special time when Prabhupada was his last visit to the West. He'd hardly eaten anything in many months. And devotees were used to seeing a very strong and battling Prabhupada, the leader of the army, all these big, strong soldiers. Prabhupada had them under his control. But this time in England, Prabhupada was just showing his ecstasy his ecstasy of seeing devotees from all over the world take to Krishna consciousness. So Prabhupada was just all the time crying in ecstasy. And devotees, they were jumping in ecstasy. Prabhupada could hardly move, but when the kirtans were going on, Prabhupada, he would just go like this with his fingers, and that was just like this, and that was an indication to devotees they should all start jumping, and they'd all start jumping wildly just on Prabhupada's going like this. So Tamal Krsna Maharaj brought Prabhupada to England, and on his Vyasa Puja day, that was in 1977, Tamal Krsna Maharaj, he narrated all of Prabhupada's life story, especially since he started preaching. Tamal Krsna Maharaj had been with Prabhupada all the time. Prabhupada, he was just sitting there, and from time to time Prabhupada would say a few words and interject something, and Tamal Krsna Maharaj was talking about all the difficulties that Prabhupada went through to get the property in Juhu. So many difficulties they went through, and he was selling so many things, and then Prabhupada just said something, that dog. So then Tamal Krsna Maharaj wasn't sure what he was talking about. That dog. He thought maybe he was talking about Mr. Naya, who was the person who was he sold the land to Prabhupada, but then he tried to cheat him and keep the land. Or whether they were talking about the municipal commissioner, who was Prabhupada talking about. But actually Prabhupada was trying, because he was obliged to go around in one car at that time, because there was no other transport, with one man would keep the dog in the back of the car. And for Prabhupada, it's such a horrible thing that he had to go in a car with a dog. Because Tamal Krishna was talking about all the difficulties that they went through. And Prabhupada said, don't forget that one other thing, that dog. I had to sit in the car with the dog. Which, nowadays people, they take their dogs, not in Dubai, at least there's something good about Islam. But nowadays in India, people are very proud of their dogs, and they take them in their cars with them. But Prabhupada was thinking this was, so many austerities I went through for Krishna, don't forget to tell that he had to sit with the dog. So Tamal Krishna brought him back to India, to Vrindavan, and Prabhupada passed away. And devotees who were there, they were surprised at how stoic Tamal Krishna Maharaj appeared. Stoic, do you know what this means? In this context it would mean calm and self-controlled, while other devotees were just crying and they couldn't do anything. But Tamal Krishna Maharaj immediately arranged for the samadhi ceremony, because he thought, I have to. While others they just couldn't do anything, he immediately arranged so many things. Call everybody, invite. We have to arrange we have to dig the samadhi. We have to call the devotees who can perform the ceremony. And devotees were surprised at how he appears to be so calm. But he was saying, I have to go on with my service to Prabhupada. Didn't stop. In this condition, I have to perform my service also. So after Prabhupada passed away, then Tamal Krishna Maharaj became one of the first devotees, 11, who were initiating in our movement. And after Prabhupada passed away, there were many controversies in our movement and many major disagreements. And Tamal Krishna Maharaj was in the heart of all of them, as far as I can remember. He was a very controversial figure. And he was a very pushy person, and he pushed many devotees to serve Krishna. And some, they didn't appreciate that. So many devotees actually came to dislike Tamal Krishna Maharaj and to criticize him in various ways. And historically speaking, we could say he made some mistakes, some serious mistakes. We could say that. But then, anyone who's going to take the lead, they're going to make decisions, and sometimes they're not going to all work out. So these things can't be denied also. Jayadvaita Maharaj in Mayapur, the day after Tamal Krishna Maharaj passed away, he gave his eulogy or remembrance of Tamal Krishna Maharaj in one line. I didn't get a chance to speak at all, so you can imagine. There were so many, and several of the devotees, they were very frank that Tamal Krishna Maharaj was a very controversial figure. He almost seemed to like to be in the heart of controversy. So they were, even the first of his disciples to speak said that he pushed me so hard that at one point I ran away and I couldn't come in front of him even. For several years I couldn't come in front of him because he was so strong on me. But then I realized, what am I doing? I'm a fool. I'm not coming before my spiritual master. So so many of his disciples spoke with so much love for him. But Jayadvaita Maharaj, I'll try and remember it as best I can. He said that never was a devotee admired, respected, and loved so much by so many devotees who at the same time totally disagreed with him. So that's a fact. He was a perfectionist. Ravindra Swarup Prabhu, he was remembering saying that. Perfectionist. That he wanted everything perfect. That if we're going to serve Krishna, we should do everything very properly. So he said that a perfectionist, they often drive people crazy, and so it was difficult. And for many people, it was very, very difficult to be with him, because he'll be insisting that everything should be just exact. But then, if you see his disciples, if we see someone and they say, "Oh, I'm a disciple of Tamal Krishna Maharaj," then generally we will expect that they are very well trained, because he was very difficult in the sense that he didn't allow them to be substandard. He was very demanding. Even one of his disciples, he was explaining how my spiritual master used to chastise me so much. I was surprised, because this particular disciple, I know he was very, very pure. I mean, I consider him practically a pure devotee since the beginning. But Tamal Krishna was chastising him very much also, because he wanted to see that all his disciples come up to the very highest standard of Krishna consciousness. Sometimes it was very difficult for them, and he was in many ways a difficult person to be with. But as many disciples said, that Tamal Krishna Maharaj was like a very well prepared chutney, that it's so hot, there's so much chilies that it burns so much you can't tolerate it. At the same time, it's so sweet that you have to go on eating it. So, and we saw also, I saw in that day in Mayapur how, actually, although, many devotees, I'll be quite frank, I kept a respectful distance. Tamal's a heavy person. So, but so many devotees, they loved him so much. And even though, as to Jayadvaita Maharaj, and others also said that even they disagreed with him to the point of in some cases practically disliking. But then, when someone passes away, when a devotee passes away, then whatever disagreements or about service may have been there, that it becomes, in the context of time, it becomes insignificant. And then you see what service he has done for Prabhupada. Most of us, we won't be able to do that kind of service, because we're just not that kind of person. We just don't have that kind of power to do. He's such a powerful person. He did so many personally serving Prabhupada, starting the Sankirtan in the first place, and then starting the big Sankirtan, getting the land in Mayapur, helping Prabhupada in those very difficult days in India. And Prabhupada trusted him very intimately, and he gave him so many services. The China mission. Who else could have gone to China? So the services he did, it's inconceivable what he's done to serve Prabhupada's mission. So he trained up many disciples who will go on serving his mission. We're all connected with him. It's a big transcendental family. I myself, I didn't realize, because I hardly saw Tamal Krishna Maharaj. I never served in the same area as him. I mean, he was in India, based in India for a short time in Bombay. For a few months, I was serving out of Bombay, but I was traveling in South India. I used to come and get books, and I did some work with the BBT, but I didn't see him much, hardly at all. So once he came to me in a dream. This is a long time ago, and he said, "You should come and serve with me," because he was like that. He used to take men. "You should come and serve with me." And in the dream I said, "I can't, I have responsibility in Bangladesh." I was serving in Bangladesh at that time, so I had some duties there. So I didn't see him much, and he was in America and China, and I was in India. And even for many years I was based in Bangladesh and Thailand and all these places. I hardly saw any of my god brothers, not to speak of the more senior ones, because we were cut off practically. There was no email in those days. The phones, I mean, they had phone sets, but they hardly worked. We couldn't afford to use them for international calls anyway. So we were cut off. So I didn't have that much association with him. I didn't realize how much he personally meant to me until he left, because he was so much in the center of our movement. Even in the last few years, he'd been a little withdrawn. He was withdrawn in the sense he wasn't leading up the management. He was doing some academic work. But even though he was taking a quiet role, he was always prominent in our movement. I mean, like I say, he was in a category of his own. There were others who were, I mean, maybe him, Bhagavan also was another big man, Harikesh. But many of those big leaders, they were big, and then they just exploded, and we didn't see them again. But even though he went through many rough times, and like I say, our movement, we're fighting against Maya, and in a fight it's not always smooth. There are a lot of battles and explosions and wrong turns and right turns. So in all of this he was a controversial figure, but he always, throughout all, he kept this very strong desire to serve Prabhupada's mission and Prabhupada's movement. So it was a shock. We just don't expect it. I mean, when someone's old and their health is poor and they pass away, you expect it. And even though on the Indian roads there are maybe dozens of deaths every day, but you don't expect a Vaishnava and an Acharya to pass away like that. It's very it's unusual. But anyway, Krishna has his plan, and we can't control Krishna. He's the supreme controller. He has his way of doing things, which sometimes is very difficult to understand. Actually, on that day, I didn't know anything about it. Actually, what was going on? After I would leave the temple room just after the Tulsi, even while the Tulsi Arti, while the kirtan for that was going on, because Mayapur festival, it's very intense, and it's great if you can get your rounds chanted before 7 o'clock, because it's very difficult to do so, because there are so many devotees from all over the world, and if everyone you've ever met, I mean, as a sannyasi who's traveling around, if everyone you met comes and at least just says, "Hare Krishna, how are you?" If it only takes 1 minute, and usually it takes more, then your whole morning's gone, and you're never going to chant any rounds, because you don't see devotees for so much time. So I would usually go out after the Tulsi Arti, and I'd just go and hide away somewhere and chant my rounds, because otherwise it's very difficult to chant your rounds otherwise. So then I was chanting my rounds on the veranda of the long building there in Mayapur, and then I saw Jayapataka Maharaj and Shivaram Maharaj. Is there a devotee called Shivaram here? He's not here now. Gopal Krishna was telling me he has a disciple. So anyway, I saw them getting in a Tata Sumo and other devotees piling in. So I thought, well, they must be going for a japa walk. So I thought, shall I join them? And I thought, no, I chanted most of my rounds actually before Mangalati. That's another way to get your rounds chanted in Mangalati. In Mayapur, get up early and chant them before everyone else gets up. So I thought, no, I only have a couple of rounds more to chant. I'll stay behind and do some reading. And then one of my disciples came and said that, well, actually, Jagtar Maharaj and Shiva Maharaj went off. There's been some accident, and Tamal Krishna Maharaj has been in a car accident. So I said, well, what's the condition? He said, well, he's unconscious, but they're going to move in Ranagat, which is a town. It's 30 kilometers. It's about from Mayapur 45 or 50 kilometers, so it's not so far. So I said they're going to move him. He told me they're going to move him to a hospital in Calcutta. They said, do you want to go? Some of the sannyasis are going. And I thought, well, no, if he's unconscious and he's going to Calcutta, then anyway he's going to be all right. And so I thought, no, I'll stay here for the rest of the festival. So then I came back to the temple room at just before 7 o'clock for Nrsingadev's Arti. And then I saw Sridhar Maharaj, and so he was the first sannyasi. I said, well, what's the news about Tamal Krishna Maharaj? I said, well, the news is coming that he's passed away, which I wasn't ready for at all. I said, well, how is that possible? Who said that? He said, well, the devotees said that, Jayapataka Maharaj had phoned and said, and Gopal Krishna Maharaj had phoned and said. So I immediately ran up the stairs to the office where the general manager sits. So I went in there, and a few other devotees went in there. I said, I'm going to check this out. I'm going to make sure. So I spoke with him in Bengali, and he said, what happened? And he said, yeah, he said, first of all, they phoned and said it was a very serious condition, and then Jayapataka Maharaj phoned, and it seems that he's gone away. So I came down and I told to Sridhar Maharaj, and he said, well, we have to announce this to the devotees. Who's going to do that? Who's going to dare to announce that? I said, I think you should do, Sridhar Maharaj. So I said, okay. And he said, well, we have to announce in other languages also, because it's Mayapur festival. There are devotees, many devotees who don't understand English. So I said, okay, I can do in Bengali and Hindi. And there's one of my disciples there from Russia who knows good English. I said, he can do in Russian. Those are the main languages. So then we said, well, we'll announce after the deity greeting and before Guru Puja. So then we had Nrsingadev's. Actually, Nrsingadev's Arti was going on, and Panchatattva Arti was going on, and then it was just. So we just decided this among us. It was just two of us. We decided, and. But then the deity greeting for Radha Madhava was getting delayed. So then Sridhar Maharaj said, well, shall we announce now? I said, yeah, let's announce now. So then we went to the mic, and then Sridhar Maharaj announced that there's some very bad news. There's a car accident this morning, and Tamal Krishna Maharaj has gone to Krsna. And then immediately from among the women there was a wailing, and then where there was one voice, it sounded like a Bengali male voice, Haribo, at the same time. And then I was supposed to announce in Bengali, but Shubhag Maharaj was standing there as Bengali, so he announced in Bengali. Then we saw a senior devotee, native Hindi speaker, so he spoke. So I didn't announce, and then And we had to decide, what do we... Immediately, of course, we're not prepared for this in any way, so we had to decide what to do. And actually, we decided that before the announcement. And then before we announced, then Sridhar Maharaj announced that there'll be no Bhagavatam class this morning, just chanting Hare Krishna. That's all. We'll just sit and we'll chant Hare Krishna. So then we went home. We had Guru Puja for Prabhupada, and a picture of Tamal Krishna Maharaj was somehow brought, very small pictures brought very quickly and put in Prabhupada's Vyasa-san. So all the devotees, they offered flowers to Tamal Krishna Maharaj and to Prabhupada at the Guru Puja. And one of Tamal Krishna Maharaj's oldest disciples was there. He offered the Guru Puja to Prabhupada and to his Guru Maharaj. And like I said, we didn't expect this, so we didn't know what to do. So, we had to think what to do step by step. So, and we started having kirtan, and Prabhu Vishnu Maharaj led kirtan for about 1.5 or 2 hours. And actually the tempo picked up, and after the devotees were just completely shocked, but then they started dancing and chanting enthusiastically. I just sat down, actually. I sat just in front of Radha Madhava's altar. There's a big plinth. So I sat down. I couldn't get into dancing. I was sitting and chanting. And then after some time I thought, well, there are so many things, and then again I saw Sridhar Maharaj said, look, we have to phone and tell the different temples in the world, and then there's and then what about Tamal Krishna Maharaj's close friends? And then so many things have to be done. And I was thinking that actually the Samadhi ceremony couldn't take place for several days because this happened on a Friday. And there are so many formalities, especially for a foreigner. You have to get permission from the American embassy. You have to give clearance. At least that's what I understood. From the relatives, because legally the body belongs to his closest relatives. Legally the body doesn't belong to the devotees. So I was thinking that it's Friday and this all isn't going to get done till at least Monday. So I was thinking it's all going to take some time. So the kirtan was going on. So I thought, we hadn't eaten anything and I hadn't drunk anything hardly. I just didn't feel. So anyway, the devotees asked me, though, are you going to take prasadam midday? So I said, okay, I'll take prasadam. Just make something very simple, no spices, nothing. Because we have to eat something because we have to go until probably Monday or Tuesday, so we can't fast all that time. Then I just sat down I was just about to take prasad when I heard some siren, and I heard, well, what's that? And they said, well, they usually use that when they want to call all the GBCs together. So I said, find out what that is, and they said, the body is coming. So I'm surprised. I got up, I didn't take prasadam, and then actually it was about almost an hour that we were all waiting at the gate and performing kirtan. In the meantime, they selected a site for the samadhi, and the digging was going on next to Prabhupada's samadhi. So we were all performing kirtan. And then eventually the vehicle came. And all devotees offered their obeisances there. And drove up very slowly to the building, and Tamal Krishna Maharaj's body was brought in preparing for the samadhi. And then all the time, in my mind, and I'm sure in everyone else's mind there, that we were all thinking that maybe it's just not true. Because it's very difficult. We're thinking somehow it's just some mistake. Somehow it's all wrong, it's not true. We just can't imagine. But then Tamal Krishna Maharaj's body was laid down there. inside a room, just the sannyasis and some of his comrades. I took the opportunity to touch my head to his feet and beg forgiveness for all offences. I was looking, and then I realized that yes, actually it's true. Tamal Krsna Maharaj he's passed away. His face, if you ever saw Tamal Krsna Maharaj, you'd see he was very, very strong looking, very firm and determined, and his face was still like that. But at the same time, it was very, very peaceful. I'd never seen him looking so peaceful. He never had peace. Usually people think sadhus have peace. Sadhus, they don't have peace. Especially real sadhus, those who are trying to do something for Krishna, they won't get any peace because they have so many services to do and so many anxieties in how to perform Krishna's service. But he looked very, very firm and strong and determined and very, very peaceful. I'd never seen him look so peaceful. So then you just can't imagine the atmosphere that everyone... There are many of his disciples there actually. Because he'd come to Mayapur for the first time in 6 years. He spent a long time there. For several... I just come to Mayapur at that time. But for several... I think for about 2 weeks before that, he was holding ecstatic kirtans in his room every evening. Sitting. And then they had to go to Bhakti Charmar's room, which was bigger. And then they ended up in the temple room. Because so many devotees were coming. They're having very, very ecstatic kirtans. Very meditative kirtans. So... his last days were spent in the Dham, surrounded by many disciples and many friends. Many of his godbrothers were very close friends, relishing the nectar of chanting Hare Krishna. Then Krishna took him away. Jayapataka Maharaj described the devotees who were there in the hospital. They described how when they took his body to Mayapur, now actually what happened was they phoned to Dallas Temple and they wanted to know what were his instructions, if he'd left an instruction, what should he do with his body. So he said that he'd made a will and said that I want my samadhi to be in Govardhan, because he had established an ashram in Govardhan. But he said, if by any chance I pass away in Mayapur or close to Mayapur, then I want to have my samadhi in Mayapur. So he was actually just within the border of the Dham, at the place where Haridas Thakur used to chant. He was just at that place. So when it came the time to leave the hospital, the local people wouldn't let them go. Jayapataka Maharaj explained that about 200 or 300 people surrounded him and said, we want to have darshan. We've waited all this time, we want to have darshan. And they showed his feet, and they said, we want to see his face. So only then they let him go. And the news had travelled up to Shantipur, which is the nearest town north of there. And the streets were lined with people. And in Bengal, the ladies, when there's anything auspicious, they'll do. So they were doing. Because they know that sadhu, in either when he's living or not actually dead, but even when he passes away, his body is always auspicious. You showed me that photo. Remember you showed me those photos? So, some of his closest friends, Kesha Bharti Prabhu, who Niranjan Maharaj was telling to me that Tamal Krsna Maharaj trusted Kesha Bharti Prabhu like he trusted no one. He was his very closest friend in this world. So Kesha Bharti Prabhu was saying that Actually, it's Krishna's arrangement that he'll go on preaching, because if his samadhi was in Govardhan, that ashram, it's a very remote place actually, and not many people go there. But in Mayapur, so many people come. And they come to Prabhupada, thousands. I mean, every day, at minimum hundreds of people come. And at weekends, thousands. And so many devotees come from all over the world. And they go to Prabhupada's Samadhi Mandir. So they'll also be going to Tamal Krishna Maharaj's Samadhi Mandir. And that way he'll go on blessing them. So that was Krishna's arrangement, that he would go on blessing them even after he's passed away from this world. And I also wrote in that it's very difficult to understand why Krishna had taken him away while his service was unfinished. Kesha Bharati Prabhu wrote to me and said that, well, as far as his academic service was concerned, that the professor had his PhD thesis, which was on the contributions of Srila Prabhupada. He wanted to get a PhD because he wanted to preach among the big scholars. So they really need preaching too. They're really causing a lot of damage by propagating their wrong ideas. But they don't listen to you unless you have a PhD. That's their system. So he was doing his PhD on the contributions of Srila Prabhupada. There's only one chapter left to go, but his mentor at the university, I think it was at Cambridge University. He was living in Oxford, but he was doing his degree from Cambridge. So his mentor spontaneously volunteered to finish the last chapter because he knew what the subject matter was, and the material was there, and to make sure that he was given a posthumous PhD. So Kesha Bharati Prabhu said actually his service wasn't finished. But actually, when I wrote that his service wasn't finished, I wasn't referring to his academic service, which was going to be finished anyway by his professor at the university. But I mean, there's so much more he could have done. So much more. There's no one in our movement like him. So there's so much more he could have done. But anyway, Krishna has his own plans. We don't understand his plans. So Krishna took him to him, and he'll go on preaching through his samadhi, through his books. That one book of his, the Servant of the Servant, has been very influential on me. The value of traveling Sankirtan and that dynamic, always preaching mood, and his writing is also so really very, very gifted, talented writer. So he's influenced so many people, and will continue to do through his books and through his disciples. Yeah, that God's Demigods and what is it? God's Demigods and Incarnations cassettes. That's been extremely influential. I mean, many people's lives have changed through that. Hindus, I'm talking, born Hindus. We are not born Hindus. You are born Hindus. So that's been very, very influential. And that changed many, many people's lives because it's so powerful and convincing. Even Mahamani Krishna Prabhu, who's in many ways the father of preaching here in Dubai, he said that, well, practically from seeing that cassette, our lives changed, and then from that we started preaching in Dubai, and that had a lot to do with the whole development here. So
we had a screening less than 4 weeks ago. We had a screening of that here in our temple hall. Before this.
Yeah. God's Demigods and Incarnations. So you can see what a powerful preacher. Very convincing. People, I mean, anyone who came in his presence, immediately you have to respect. He just immediately commanded respect. And his manner of preaching was so authoritative and logical and empowered that people just had to accept.
Someone who saw that cassette you mentioned for the first time, I'm seeing someone giving a speech for so long without changing his composure. Absolutely saying that. And animosity or now change of
He was very planned.
poised.
He knew what he was doing.
Pretty obvious in the book. Maharaj mentions that.
Well, he wrote several books actually. I particularly like that Servant of the Servant.
The Sankirtan part, we could left in the morning at 9 o'clock. He would make them stand in a row, and then he would examine everybody's tilak was in the right time.